Okay, lovely. Welcome, everyone. I know we're just getting started. My name is Leora, she, hers. I'm your moderator for today, calling in from or zooming in from the Bay Area, California, part of one of the mental health technology transfer centers, the Pacific Southwest, MHTTC. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to invite Ricky to spotlight me, and we're going to get started. It's time. We're going to get started. So for those of you who are just joining us, again, as I said, welcome. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to you. If you are normally accustomed to being able to put in chat where you're from and what you're doing, you'll notice that the chat, that you can't in the chat today. And that's because we've turned off the chat so that we can center the conversation on the folks in the room and actually allow ourselves a little neurobiological exhale and release from having to track chat and the Zoom at the same time. So our staff will be sharing with you and communicating to you, but I just wanted to name that and know that I often feel like a sense of connection and cohesion when I see everyone in the chat, and I know that we can't do that today. So a invisible big welcome to all of you in the room. Thank you for being here. We are in session 2, How Might We Grow? This series is called Healing School Communities in the Context of Faith-Based Bullying. You are here today because you care about holding the hearts and minds of our students and staff who are witnessing, listening, experiencing, feeling harm that's connected to how people themselves or others or people they care about or know about or are reading about identify in the world. And we are really incredibly grateful to have a conversation today with very thoughtful thought leaders and practitioners. So today's session 2 focuses on how might we grow. And if you were with us on Tuesday with What Do We Know, you know that Tuesday was kind of more focused on research and data. What are we learning about this phenomenon, these phenomenons? And today is on what do we do now with that knowledge or that learning? So again, welcome everyone in the room. If you are just joining us, again, my name is Leora. I'm the moderator for today, and I'm going to go over a couple housekeeping things and then move us into dialogue and discussion. And I'm going to welcome all team members who are our panelists. They'll join us on video when we cue them in a moment. So if you're just seeing my face, that is exactly right. That's what should be happening. Okay, so a couple things. The first is that if there's anything that comes up that is not part of our game plan and hinges on Zoom safety, we're going to close the whole thing down and we'll email you. The other piece, as I mentioned earlier, is that you are muted and off video. And again, that's so that we can center the focus of the presenters and of what they want to share and with whom they want to be with whom they are in dialogue. You have the Q&A pod. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see, and I'm going to kind of move to this so you can see the visual, but at the very bottom in that blue, you'll see that Q&A pod. And that is the way in which you can share resources. You can share your own organizations. If you do teaching and practice in this conversations connected language, you can share questions that you have for speakers or panelists, and our team will be tracking them, answering some of them, especially if they're the technical questions. How do we get the recording? How do I get a certificate? And they're also going to be on the back end bringing those questions to me so that when we get to the Q&A, I can sift through and answer them. I'm going to go back here. That I want to also offer, as Ricky mentioned in the chat, that today's session is closed captioned. So I really welcome you to click on show captions so that especially if you're a visual learner, we can track the sharing with the words. Please let us know in the Q&A pod if you're having technical difficulties. You can also email Ricky. And then a couple other follow-up things. Our recording will be posted on our event website, which I welcome our team to put in the chat. You can already check out the recording from Tuesday, already up. A huge thank you to our team for doing such quick post-production. You can follow us on social media. Right after today, you'll receive also an email of certificate of attendance. So those are all the things that are happening, I want to mention too that on the event page, I'm going to move through here. On the event page, you can also learn more about this network. So as I mentioned at the very top, I'm Leora. I'm from the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. That's that bottom left green region. um, but I wanted to name that we are actually part of a full network. The team that's putting this together is cross center. That's why all of our panels are national. And that's because this is a collectively held challenge, conversation, contention. So this has been a multi-center effort to put this together. You can attend any of our centers, no cost training and technical assistance that supports the mental health and school mental health workforce. So I really welcome you to check out the mhtcnetwork.org if you are new to us. Okay. So we are, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, SAMHSA. So this is our disclaimer that today's views and opinions are of the presenters themselves only. And even more specifically, and I'll say this again in a little bit, even more specifically, there are some folks today that hold multiple hats, and some of those hats are on school boards or in other positions. And so we want to remind everyone listening that the views and opinions expressed today are of themselves only. They don't necessarily represent a particular school district, school board, county, network, association. All right. And let's talk about why today. Why this thing? Why now? Why today? Why this session? And that actually really kind of makes me take a big breath and inhale and exhale. So the lineage of this program is that back in 2020, we as a network held a Healing School Communities in the context of racial violence. And actually our team members will post that, the archives of those sessions in the chat. And in 2020, we know and we heard from all of you that there was so much being surfaced, exposed, reminded, affirmed when it came to whose lives mattered and whose lives did not matter or felt like they didn't matter in our school communities. And of course, that's not just a 2020 issue, that's a now issue also. So we brought together a lot of thought leaders across the country. And this year, SAMHSA has asked the School Mental Health Initiative to focus on bullying. And we know, in light of Tuesday's conversation around data and research, that there is a deep undercurrent and overcurrent that are running through and within our school halls and walls, whether that's a literal school site or district or county or department or in any way that you support the well-being of young people, that is holding people of faith both for each other and against each other and with each other, and grappling with how to specifically contend with the presence and reality of anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish bullying. And we are here today to not only talk about that but really also to move us into a belonging, into a pro. How do we start to and restart to hold our schools accountable to humanizing and being centers of healing and not centers of harm? So I welcome you to check out our event page to read a little bit more about the context, particularly about what this is and what this is not. You'll note also on our event page that our team has put together a really beautiful CV, curriculum vitae of all of our speakers and their organizations or affiliated publications. And that's because we know that 90 minutes is incredibly limited. If you were with us on Tuesday, I'm sure all of us ended with a like, I want more. Why didn't we have 30 more minutes about that one question, or that question went too long? So we are just going to be in collective agreement that today is exactly what today is, and that there is ample time for us to both learn and unlearn. So our hope is that we all walk away, me included, walk away with both of those things. What do I need to do deeper learning about? And what do I need to do deeper unlearning about, with, and why? Right? Who will benefit from that? And who might be harmed if I don't do that? So that's our invitation for today. we're specifically focusing on anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish language. And I'm naming that because, and many of you might know this or that might be new, but the terms of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are quite contemporary, and they're actually, they're used even to, they have been used and employed to create an even bigger sense of othering. You are not this, you are different from us. And by saying anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim, we are really committing to centering the humanity of the peoples and communities, the students and staff who are feeling it, holding it, and contending with it. And because it's a much bigger and broader piece to hold. And the last couple things before we move into conversation is that the series is really held in knowing with a humbleness that the conversations are multi-layered, right? We all know from a public health perspective and public health framework that there can be ideological conversations and challenges, institutional conversations and challenges, interpersonal, and then internalized, those 4 I's. Today's conversation and Tuesdays really hones in on interpersonal with a little bit of nod to institutional, particularly in school policy. And hopefully, our speakers today will also share about their own contention with internalized experiences of anti-Jewishness or anti-Muslimness in this work, right? So I'm going to invite us again to be in listen and reflect mode. And I'm also most importantly going to invite us to be in accepting and expecting a lack of closure as we move into this conversation. And I'm naming this for myself as well. To our guests, who I'm about to bring up, I'm going to remind us to both commit to giving and making space. There's 6 incredible folks joining us with very both shared and diverse perspectives and wisdom points. So I'm going to nod for both keeping our thoughts both brief, but also powerful. That's an easy task, easy ask, easy task. All right. On that note, I want to. So one more thing to do, and then we'll bring up the team, which is a reminder. And you heard Danielle, the moderator, do this on Tuesday. The reminder is that our network, the MHDTC, holds ourselves accountable to recovery-oriented language and recovery-oriented values in the program we offer. So this series is really held in and anchored in both the language you see on the left and the language you see on the right in Spanish and English. I just want to take a moment for us to pause, maybe do a little settling on which of these values do we want to most uphold today for ourselves. And I invite our speakers to do that as well. And I'm going to say mine out loud because I'm the only person who can speak right now, which is that I'm really hoping that today's conversations hold the healing-centered and trauma-responsive spirit at the core, if not more. So on that note, I'm going to invite our thought leaders and thought partners into conversation. So you'll see their faces join me in Spotlight. I'm going to invite us to meet our guests, Lana Kaufman and Dr. Abdullah Dil, Jamie Spector, Dr. Razake, and Dr. Dean and Shachar Cohen-Hodos. And I'm going to refer to all their first names here on out. For their complete bios, my team is going to drop their complete bios and the CV into the chat so you can learn more about them. Again, I'm going to do a very gentle disclaimer that the reminder that all of their views and opinions are theirs only. And then we're going to kick it off. We're going to kick it off knowing that in the context, hi everyone, hi. In the context of the rise in verbal and physical violence towards and sometimes from Muslims and Jews in our school communities, and we could even offer a spiritual violence and identity-based violence, our students and our staff are really watching all of us in how we respond, how we provide space, and how we create the platforms to really again, as I mentioned earlier, humanize each other in our school walls. So I'm hoping in light of that, in light of the invitation, if you can introduce yourself with your name and your role, location, pronouns, and then why you said yes to this. Why did you say yes to being in the conversation with each other, with people you know and don't know, with an audience who wants to listen? What is important about this particular conversation right now? So we're gonna go Alana, Jaleel, uh, uh, Jamie, Reina, Sarah, and then Shachar.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Good morning, good midday. My name is Ilana Kaufman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Jews of Color Initiative. I'm a community relations strategist and specialist. I'm an educator. I spent 20 years as a school administrator. And I work at the intersection of Jewish community, race and racism, demography, all in service of our multiracial, multi-faith nation that we are here to not only maintain, but my belief is to model how to live and thrive in community together. And specific to today, I have the privilege of working with school leaders and district leaders, navigating the intersections that come with identity, leadership, school values, passion, and conflict. And it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Alana. Jaleel.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Jaleel Abdul-Adil from Urban Youth Trauma Center at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm also, full disclosure, SAMHSA grantee, so I'm happy to support all SAMHSA work. I'm part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Part of our expertise is to contribute trauma-informed violence prevention and intervention. I've spent the last 35 years working in schools and many underserved, unserved, and misserved communities in urban settings. So it's a privilege to be able to be proactive and talk about some actual tools that can help any dispossessed or marginalized youth and families. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaleel. All right, Jamie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Spector. I'm zooming in from the Northeast in Vermont, Abenaki land. I'm a clinical social worker and school social worker. I work in a public middle and high school as a school social worker. And my work has focused for many years on helping schools deepen trauma-informed and trauma-transformed practices and sort of shifting away from behaviorist interventions with students. I was really excited and honored to be invited to join this conversation, really to discuss how we can center this conversation on from a trauma-transformed lens, both for our students, for our school staff, for our families, because I see how these things can often really spin. And I think about, as a social worker, I think about ecosystems and, how the sort of nervous systems of the school can really be impacted when incidents of harm happen, and how we can really support the whole school. I'm also a Jewish person, and so as a Jewish mental health provider, I just feel deeply committed to supporting my community to heal from intergenerational collective trauma, so we can really stop the cycle of violence and stop perpetuating violence on others also. And sometimes in the name of safety, and to really understand how we can build relationships of support and mutual support and care for each other as the path towards safety and belonging with others and community. So I'm excited to talk with my colleagues here today about that.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for being here. Reina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reina Razak. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you from Denver, Colorado, which is the unceded territory of the Arapaho, Sioux, Ute, and over 40 other tribal nations. I'm also the Director of Opportunity Access and Inclusion for Englewood Schools, which is a small district just outside of Denver. And I'm a Muslim Bangladeshi American woman who's an immigrant to the US, who started school not speaking any English, who was misidentified for special education, who also finds joy and community and resilience in the very same identities that systemically marginalize me in this country. I have the immense privilege of getting paid to help my school district be more inclusive through equitable practices. Which is a dream job. And I also understand that my district is a small microcosm of what's happening nationally. So I said yes to this conversation because over the last decade or so, we've seen this stark rise in hate crimes and bias motivated behaviors, not only in adults, but it's been bubbling up in our children as well, as young as elementary schools. And particularly hate crimes that are racially and religiously motivated. And our babies deserve better than that. And it's up to us as adults, as the shepherds of this society, for them to do better. So I'm really grateful to be here with all of these other incredible panelists, hear, them share their brilliance and really discuss how we do better for our kids.
Thank you, Reina. Okay, moving to Southern California, to Sara and then to Shachar.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Dean. I use she, her pronouns. I'm joining from Los Angeles County, the historical land of the Tongva. Why did I say yes to this conversation today? After being an adult Muslim participant in Newground, Muslim Jewish Partnership for Change, which is a dialogue-based fellowship program in LA, I've spent much time bringing Jewish and Muslim youth together as one of the facilitators for Newground's teen program, alongside my Jewish partner, who is also on this panel with me, Shahar. Both before and after October 7th, I've seen how Jewish, Israeli, Muslim, Palestinian, and Arab students are really grappling with belonging every day in classrooms, playgrounds, and in community spaces. Every young person, regardless of their identities, wants to know that they matter in the world, that if something happened to them, the people around them would care. And for young people who identify with the unfolding events in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, this is true even more acutely. These students wonder every day if they can show up as their full selves in their classrooms. Can I wear my kippah, my keffiyeh, my hijab to class? And when students have to hide or mask parts of themselves to their peers and teachers, making connections at school becomes very difficult. And when young people don't connect with others, becoming isolated, they're more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors and struggle with mental health. So if we really care about our students, we have to find a way to lean into this very challenging conversation and find a better way forward. So I'm so grateful to be in conversation with all of you all. I'm glad everyone else also chose to say yes today.
I am too. I am too. We are too. Okay, round us out, Shachar. Who are you? Where are you? And why did you say yes?
Hi everyone. I'm also just so grateful to be here today. I'm Shachar Cohen-Hodis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also coming to you from Los Angeles and Tongva land. I'm here. I said yes for 3 reasons, I think, at least. One is that I'm a restorative justice practitioner in K through 12 schools, practitioner and trainer. And one of the things I worry a lot about is we've become more interested in using non-punitive forms of harm, but not when it comes to faith-based harm. And that really scares me because we know that punitive responses to harm don't actually often change the outcomes of someone's behavior and don't provide, more importantly, healing for the people who were harmed. So I'm really, healing is a word I'm holding on to right now. How do we really make sure we can heal and change minds and do real education? The other is as a facilitator for Muslim and Jewish youth alongside Sarah, I'm seeing our high schoolers finding so much meaning in sitting in the gray space. And I don't think we give ourselves enough space to do that. And so I'm excited to sit in the complexity with all of you. And I think most importantly, as someone deeply rooted in Jewish community and Jewish tradition, in deep relationship with Muslims, I think the only way that we navigate this well is by navigating it together. And I think our safety is bound to one another and our futures are bound to one another in so many ways. And so looking at anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish bias side by side feels really important to me. And so I'm really grateful to be doing that with all of you.
Today's session, retitled Sitting in the Gray Space, brought to you by all of us right now. It's a really important segue to our first question, open to all of us. Part of the contention and the challenge and the harm is the reducing of a story or an experience and flattening, right? Muslims are, Jews are, this is, anti-Semitism is, Islamophobia is. And we know that the conversation is much bigger, interconnected, interwoven. And so I want to open us with, how do we understand this intersection, particularly because this conversation is focused on staff and student mental health. How do we understand the intersection between faith-based bullying, belonging, and school mental health? So what does that intersection look like and feel like in practice? And I'll hold the second question for when we get back. Also, shout out, thank you to our team. They'll be putting the questions that we're asking in the chat so you can follow them and anchor our own listening. So I'll do that question one more time. How do we understand the intersections of faith-based bullying, school mental health? What does that look like and feel like? And opening it up to the floor. Feel free to unmute.
I can start. I guess I'll speak to the latter part of the question, what I'm seeing and hearing amongst young people. First of all, I just want to say that faith-based and spiritual life plays a large role in the lives of many students. And yet in a lot of public education spaces, we haven't normalized talking about this aspect of student identity. And for many young people, including Jewish and Muslim students, this can make education spaces not feel truly inclusive of their whole selves. So in general, I think we need to consider offering more professional development for teachers and staff around religious literacy and cultivating cultural pluralism. And as an example of how important this is, in the current moment, a lot of Christian, Palestinian, and Arab students are feeling really erased by a lot of the discourse, which tends to frame current events and Middle Eastern history as Jewish and Muslim, due to the conflation of Arab and Muslim identities in school communities. So I just wanted to put that out there. In the current moment, what I have seen is that students, whether or not they're Jewish or Muslim, really want to understand what is happening in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. Young people are naturally wired to care about others in the world. They haven't yet restricted their sphere of caring. And then for a lot of Jewish, Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian youth, they're also hearing at home and in their faith communities that their group is in danger of annihilation. For many Jewish people, the Holocaust is barely in the rearview mirror, so that existential threat feels imminent. For many Palestinian people, they've lost so many family members since October that existential threat feels current. And then these students show up in school hoping to understand, learn, grapple with all of this, and connect with others when they need connection so desperately, but there isn't space for them to share and exchange narratives, ideas, and feelings around any of this. They want to talk about it, but they're often told it's not the right time or in the right place. And I think it's a missed opportunity. Like, just imagine the possibility if students on all sides of what is happening had the opportunity to fully and authentically share their perspectives and understanding, while also having the opportunity to fully receive the perspectives of others. We could have a generation not trapped in narrative silos and zero-sum thinking, a generation that could seek solutions to protect and uplift more than their own in-group. They might be able to see beyond their own pain and fear to acknowledge and connect with the pain and fear of others. Instead, the message students are receiving overtly or subtly is that their narrative isn't welcome in school spaces, which indicates to them that they may not fully belong. And bullying activity multiplies when belonging is conditional and restricted. Bullying is an act to assert power over another person or group. Bullying tries to establish belonging for one group at the expense of the belonging of another group, which is why effective anti-bullying campaigns rely on expanding belonging, finding ways to ensure all students fully belong in their education spaces. Additionally, without being able to dialogue, debate, and discuss, students are feeling disempowered and likely even more anxious about current events and the potential threats to their in-group. they're still consuming the social media narratives, which often promote bigotry, further polarize, increase feelings of helplessness and nihilism. And lastly, when students don't feel like they can show up as their whole self in a classroom, when they feel like they need to hide parts of themselves, they disengage with learning. For learning to occur, students must be able to connect with their teachers, peers, and their curriculum. I'm sorry, that was a little long-winded.
Never apologize for dropping really important gems. I'm curious how those gems land with your colleagues, what or other pieces that you want folks want to offer, particularly in that intersection. And I really welcome stories as well, so we can bring that intersection alive.
Well, speaking to the intersection piece in between staff and student mental health, my dissertation research actually looked at how mindfulness practices influence the culturally responsive practices of educators. And what we found is that, of course, when our staff felt more whole, when their levels of well-being and balance, and also looking at some of those specific principles of mindfulness like equanimity and things like that, that helped them show up in their full capacity for their students, which means that they were able to meet students where they're at and help them stretch and grow educationally, socially, emotionally. And so when we, invest in mental health supports and resources, sometimes in schools our focus is very much on students, and absolutely it should be. We also, though, as we think about students, really need to think about who are the people that are there supporting students day in and day out, and how do we invest in their mental health and well-being as well, through not only specific mental health supports, but also enriching their sense of belonging and safety in schools.
I would just love to add and sort of connect to what Dr. Sada and Dr. Rena offered, which is that, as we all know, schools are passionate places, and the people who work in schools are passionate. And in particular, in times of crisis, very often our interventions that are supposed to be in service to the leaders and the educators in the community, or Dr. Sada talked about the students in the community, very often those interventions, particularly in the first phase of a crisis, are actually grounded in trauma and a trauma response, and not informed pedagogy and practice. And so the value and the importance of school leaders having the capacity to do exactly what was just suggested to us, of slowing down, using mindfulness practices, getting grounded in school values, reminding everybody about kind of school practices and policies, and then giving the leaders an opportunity to separate out their trauma and passion-informed biases that then inform interventions. And really, as the colleagues have already talked about, operating from a space of wellness to understand the spaces, the gray spaces, and then to use that information to re-educate ourselves about the interventions. And like a case in point, and particularly what Dr. Sutter just brought up, very often in the Jewish community, a first phase intervention will focus on eradicating anti-Semitism in a particular context, forgetting that 20% of the US Jewish community are people of color. And so the entire intervention might be based on an assumption that all Jews are white. Or in fighting Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate, we forget about what happens to racialized Muslims in the United States as a result of racism, or forget about our community from the Middle East who might be Christian or of another faith group. And so really slowing ourselves down, checking our biases as leaders, pausing before we implement interventions, and separating out biases from real good content will help support the work that we're all talking about.
Right. So far, naming in the room, and grateful that there was advocacy to start with a question opening to everyone, because we've got a lot of questions that we'll dig in. But so far, we've highlighted. Alana, you just really named the importance to create space for adult leaders to be trauma attuned and grief sensitive to our own response patterns, our own biases, and our own ways of both. Are we moving from a place of panic or crisis containment, or are we moving from a place of listening, reflecting, including. And we heard from Reina and Sarah also that the exclusion of conversations around faith and spirituality and the full kaleidoscope of our students and staff's identities when we talk about what's in the room can lead to dehumanization, and it can also lead to students not feeling like they can bring their full selves to the classroom and to our schools, and leaders as well, right? So I want to hopefully, and Jamie and Jalil, I'm kind of looking at you, and Shachar, I'm hoping we can kind of move into questions unless you have anything burning to add to that intersection, because this conversation around balancing, well, I want to pause. What came up in the shares just offered right now was a commitment or an invitation to safety. And we know that safety is a construct, and oftentimes students and staff safety is, there's an assumption of whose safety matters more than others. And what Alana is offering us is that the work in school leadership is actually to externalize that assumption. So I want to move us into this wrestling, in Shachar's language, gray spacing of the difference between, or the holding both and, when something is either uncomfortable, in need of discourse, or bullying and harm, so that we can kind of wrestle with what Alana's saying that we see often, which is that's anti-Semitism, that's Islamophobia, and then there's a shutdown. So I'm hoping let's go to the next question. Like, how do we hold those layers, particularly when you're working with youth? And what are some ways that the participants can hear in your toolkit that you create spaces where people can wrestle with what's discourse, what's safe versus what's uncomfortable? So that's to Shachar and to Sarah.
Go for it.
I'm taking it first. First, I wish I wanted to underline what Ilana said about slowing down. And I want to acknowledge school districts are under a lot of pressure to immediately pacify community constituencies and respond. But yeah, just want to underline that, how important that is. I wanted to share a little, Shachar and I think, are going to speak a little bit about how we approach this in a new ground space, because that kind of speaks to our own experience. If we remember that students are grappling with belonging and mattering, in New Grounds teen program for Jewish and Muslim Americans, as facilitators, we support the students in cultivating a space where they all can belong, because they can show up as their full selves with the understanding that disagreement isn't something to be feared, but something to learn from. The most important step in our work is actually putting together the cohort of teens. That's the hardest part. We intentionally seek out participants with widely different political and social views. That is the first step to ensure belonging. It's to welcome these disparate positions. So we seek out the passionate Zionists, we seek out the passionate pro-Palestine activists, and everyone in between and all around. And the questions we're asking our Jewish and Muslim teens in and in between sessions is, what part of your story have you not shared yet? What would make it easier for you to share that part of yourself? We're also asking them to think about what was difficult for you to hear? Why was that difficult for you to hear? What are you most surprised to learn, and what are you still most curious to learn about? And so from in our program, from each other, the students learn about Jewishness, Muslimness, anti-Jewish bias, anti-Muslim bias, and narratives around Israel and Palestine. And we emphasize that while in the New Ground space, we're not trying to establish any particular truths around Israel and Palestine. In order to pursue meaningful connection between local Jews and Muslims, we seek to better understand how both communities understand and experience Israeli and Palestinian history and events. We also highlight that while what happens in Israel and Palestine is not Jew versus Muslim or Muslim versus Jew, but what happens there deeply impacts relationships between Jews and Muslims in America. And again, I'm sharing this as a model of how we could change the way we create space to help students grapple with this very multi-layered conversation. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my partner, Shachar, to speak a little bit about the idea of language itself.
Thank you. Just yes to everything everyone said is really what I'm sitting with right now. I think one of the things that's underlying this whole conversation is like, what is anti-Semitism and what is Islamophobia? What is anti-Muslim and what is anti-Jewish bias? My answer to you is like, I also don't know. In that I think my father is on this Zoom somewhere. He says there's no Shazam for anti-Semitism, right? There's no like Shazam for Islamophobia. It's really clear sometimes, and people argue about what is and isn't these harms. And so part of this question behind like, how do we understand what's bullying versus what's uncomfortable for someone, what truth, and multiple people brought up like truth. So when I'm thinking about my role, both in the dialogue space and in restorative practices, I'm thinking about the significance of impact. And we as school communities, I love this, need to slow down and build community in our schools. We need to help people learn how to build relationships with one another. Because when I actually know who you are, you know who I am in my full self, then when you have inevitably harmed me, because we are not going to get it right, we are humans, conflict is inevitable and natural. And I am going to, because of all of the biases I hold, because of the world I live in, I am going to harm you. And if I know you and I have the tools to navigate harm, then it's not about what type of harm it is. It's about like what was the impact on you, and what does it look like for us to be back in community as our full selves together. And that feels like the most important thing for me, is building resilient communities who are interested in navigating harm, as opposed to interested in like in making sure that we've done the things and checked off the stuff on the checklist to say we care about fighting anti-Semitism, we care about fighting Islamophobia, which is of course important to address. And you've named the human-centered work. That was actually one of the in the slides of all of the intentions for this, person first, free of labels. What does it look like for us to really create forms of accountability to navigate harm that are actually about the people who are at the center? And so my answer to that is really leaning on restorative practices, doing community building activities where people can come in. Sorry, you named, where especially in public schools, we often don't allow faith-based conversations to happen. We're really bad at holding race-based conversations. We're really bad at holding complicatedness and identity. And also, Raina, you brought in this piece around teachers, and going back to mental health. Teachers are scared of talking about this. They're scared about the retribution from parents, from principals, from admin. Teachers are scared. And when we're scared to talk about hard things, we are going to ignore it and push it down. And that's where so much harm comes in. And I've talked to countless educators who have reached out to me and said, students are asking me about this. They're asking me what's happening in Gaza. They're asking me what's happening in Israel. And I don't know what I'm supposed to say to them, because I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about keeping my job.
Shachar, what you just offered is such a beautiful segue into what I'm about to ask Jaleel and Alana, particularly because what you're naming is that it's a both cultural, communal, and climate commitment to hold the harm at the center, the impact at the center, and then unpack all the different octopi angles of what that harm means, right? And I just want to welcome the mental health practitioners in the room in the same way that we would commit to being person first in language around mental health issues, right? That someone isn't a schizophrenic but is living with, or isn't then we might use those same skills and strengths that we have in person first labeling when it comes to embracing and unpacking faith-based bullying. And in the same way that we are committed to not invisibling queerness in schools and racial identities in schools and how that impacts mental health, that you are all inviting us to also bring in the intersections of faith and spirituality in that as well. So I want to move us to Alana and Jaleel to get even to help those of us in the conversation broaden our aperture with what religious identity and ethnicity, like all those different intersections. Shachar was saying, if we put the harm in the middle and the human in the middle, then we actually get to have a broader conversation. So, okay, knowing that students and teachers and counselors and school community members are multifaceted, Black, queer, different abilities and classes and immigrant narratives, and that anti-Arab racism and anti-Palestinian racism is real, how can the two of you help us understanding anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish bullying intersectionally?
We haven't heard your beautiful voice yet, so I'm going to take that.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'll get us started. I'm sure you'll fix everything I'm about to say wrong. A couple of things come to my mind. One is that we want to name that there are different types of educational settings, right? I've had the pleasure of working even in schools, which were inside detention facilities, right? I'm also acknowledging that there's a history that is contributed to our current scholastic structures. This includes some of the sordid history related to segregation, the Native American deculturalization process that happened in the boarding schools. And even today, some of our youth and families and professionals, they're literally doing the best they can with the system that is still classist, often Eurocentric. And then it becomes even more layered when you talk about the differentiation and the othering of people of color as well as Islam. And to some degree, I still will suggest there's a serious less than supportive atmosphere for Jews as well. So we got all of that piled on to now these current crises. So you're really on the front lines, and the schools are the flashpoints, not even talking about the defunding or underfunding of the day-to-day situations and the overcrowding of classrooms. I just wanted to name that because when we talk about schools and we're going to talk about solutions, we want to make sure they're very contextual as well as cultural. So am I in a private school? Am I in a public school? And in some of the situations, including some of the Muslim communities that I work in, they have constructed their own quasi-educational structure. I'm not talking about the madrasa, the religious-based system. I mean, there'll be a basement or someone will go get a house because they're desperate to try to find a place where the curriculum reflects their identity, as well as a place they feel that their children can be safe and their parents can be heard. So that is all part of why we're having this conversation. And I do think, I'll just mention from my own perspective, that's why some of our mainstream evidence-based models for anti-bullying in schools, they're great starting points. They cannot be terminal points. There's a great need for us to adapt and enrich those models with the wisdom from community members, whether they have degrees or not, who've lived the experience of dealing with sometimes hostile situations related to identity, as well as those who successfully push through those challenges that can share that wisdom and be very tangible role models and inspirations for our young people to say, even though it's hot, okay, it's definitely hot out here right now. Well, look, there's brother so and so, sister so and so, Mr. so and so, Miss so and so. They made it through. They're sharing their stories. They're sharing what it was like in the midst of that struggle when they felt there was no hope, there was no safety, but they made it through. And here's how they made it through. And I think tapping into more of the community resources, the indigenous resources that can assist us with this will then help us better serve not only the mainstream educational institutions when it comes to this, but also those quasi-educational settings of which many in the Muslim community I know for sure because I work with them are using. This includes even weekend schools. So a person could be in a mainstream public school during a week, but they'll send them to religious schools on weekend, trying to shore up that identity. And I hope, and this is what the message I would take from panels like this, we need to reach out to them too as part of an organic kind of grassroots driven movement to make sure we've permeated the various educational systems of what does it mean to really build up a strong identity, to establish a sense of safety, and to have some things you could do in response to if and when you feel you've been threatened or hurt, or as it's mentioned, emotionally harmed, to where you don't have to shut down or feel like you have to get out. I'll pass it on over to my colleague.
I want to just, so I think that the foundation that Jaleel just offered is really, really important. And so I want to add to that and really not in any way take away from it. I mean, first of all, I want to talk about this I think in a set of maybe 4 strategies. And I want you all to think about, first of all, to Jaleel's point, we're sitting on an entire historical context that actually informs the physics of how we think about racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim hate. And so much of kind of the pedagogy or interventions are based on our pedagogy of the civil rights movement, or particularly the memory, like the historical memory, particularly of how Jews, predominantly white Jewish folks, think the civil rights movement actually took place. And that context really being one where, for example, there was a lot of racism inside of Jewish organizations around the civil rights movement. And that racism affected Black Power movements, affected Black Muslims in the United States, and those relationships. So to sort of pull on one of the threads that Jaleel offered is we have to really understand the history of the pedagogy of our school-based interventions and how that informs the narrative and who is centered in those interventions. We need to remember that our schools, and as you were talking about, as Leora was talking about leading with, this is not a schizophrenic, but this is a person with schizophrenia. Schools are not safe and welcoming environments. They are environments that try to be safe and welcoming. They're actually environments that are containers of policies and practices and procedures as informed by outside forces that are not always or really even designed to be in service to our young people and the educators who are holding the young people. And so what do we know about our school-based contexts that are actually headwinds to being successful with our interventions around anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate? To that point, what do we need to do to equip our students and our educators to understand what we can expect in terms of interventions around safety and trauma inside of schools with regard to bullying, and what we need to equip our young people and educators to navigate outside of the space and to manage expectations around that? Because the other piece is, particularly in environments that are fueled by the kind of political energy around anti-Muslim hate and Jewish hate and bullying, these political energies are not designed to be in service to us resolving these and remedying them inside of schools. And so what do we need to do to really equip our students and our educators to live within the reality of what we can do, but then also talk about, you can bring this skill outside, or you can bring the skill to your friend group, your multiracial, multi-faith friend group outside of school to have conversations that we might not be able to have inside of schools. I want us to think about the importance, and Jaleel talked about, that context really matters. And so we need to be prepared for the fact that our multi-faith community, our Muslim students, our Jewish students, our staffs and educators may have a dynamic identity depending on the context they're in. And they may temper their identities or even re-identify based on the context that they're in. And so we rather than grafting onto our Jewish and Muslim students and staff how we think they might respond to an intervention, how we think they might need a particular kind of space to nurture a conversation, a Jewish student might walk into a room and say, I don't feel particularly Jewish right now. I'm feeling very Black right now because I just had this experience being racially profiled when I walked into school today. Or a Muslim student might say, I'm feeling very, very pro-humanity right now because I just had his hex from my family. And I don't want to hear about anti-Semitism right now because we're dealing with hunger, trauma, fear, safety, fundamentally. In another setting, that student might be very proud out front and being a school leader and risking their identity. And so how do we create spaces for that to be expansive and flexible, and also responses tailored to that, and anticipate that kind of change with our students and staff all of the time? I think finally, we have to have kind of a pedagogy of wonder, and wondering with a level of structure and rigor about the multiple identities that our students and our staff are coming with. And are we asking to them to censor and edit themselves, omit themselves? And what is the cost of that to Dr. Sarah's point, existing in the space of gray. The space of gray is where we're actually going to work these things out. And the structure of schools and policies, the trauma that people are coming with in terms of applying strategies, and the reality, just the fundamental reality about what is safety in schools and what is safety that can be ported outside of school to really keep our students safe. All of it has to be tethered into kind of the through line and the pedagogy of these kind of intersectional interventions.
Thank you, Alana and Jaleel. I'm walking away with the phrase, the pedagogy of wonder. And also how, again, the invitation for us in the school mental health field, with even that is a really tight and myopic term, that the intersectionality of the way that we are trained and the way we are in conversation is necessary. Jaleel and Alana, you're bringing in sociocultural history, you're bringing in critical analysis and reflection, you're bringing in an invitation for us to think about how our school mental health providers in conversation with school leadership, where are they aligned, where they're not aligned in skill to hold inquiry rigorously and compassionately. So I want Jamie, I'm going to turn it to Jamie and Jaleel, particularly as we think about the role of trauma and grief in these spaces, and how in your experience as school mental health providers and trauma healing advocates, and Jaleel, you got to this a little bit earlier when you really named the limitations of evidence-based practices that many folks I find our own sense of safety and anchor in. How do we enhance support systems for students and staff who've experienced faith-based bullying? What do we need to do more of, and what do we need to do less of in either the pre-service training or in the programs and practices? And Jamie, I want to start with you and then go to Jaleel.
Thank you. I've been cheering for so many things my colleagues have been saying this whole time. And I actually want to go back to something that one of my colleagues said from the panel on Tuesday. I believe it was Dr. Saida, who just really called on us to really step up as adults in the schools and not to put the burden on our young people, that we need to step up as the grown-ups in these situations. And then just to follow up, Shahar, you said this so well, of just, we really need to slow down. And so I think one of the things that I have seen in schools and, is that sometimes I think that because this topic is so politically charged right now in our community, and unfortunately we're living in a time and in a political moment when our media and our social media is profiting off of the promotion of this as a hot topic, and they're spinning this widely, that there is money to be made off this issue, that people get very worked up and want to go very fast when there is an incident of harm, that, as Shahar, you said, all of our work around restorative practices, which the school I work in also works very deeply in, and we're always practicing. We've never arrived. We're always working on it. But oftentimes when there is an incident that does have some element of, a faith-based identity element to it, people very fast want to jump to punitive responses, and to really slow down. I think from a trauma transform lens, we really have to look beneath the surface. I mean, one, from what people have been talking about, I'm sort of extrapolating that a lot of people are talking about sort of high school age youth. And so one is to just think about the developmental age that you're working with. For if you're talking about an elementary age, or certain, elementary or middle school, I mean, but even it's true at a high school age, these are young people whose brains are just really in development. And they are still learning. They don't understand yet. I mean, some of the incidents that I'm aware of, young people don't understand the words that they're using. They don't understand the images that they may be reproducing or sharing. They see images and then they share them and they don't understand what they mean. So again, we need to step up in our role as adults to first and foremost teach them and educate them. What does this mean? Do they understand? Do they know the history? Do they understand the context? And that is like one of our roles as adults in their lives, is to, is to help provide that knowledge for them. And then, definitely to help hold the adults in the system to take a breath, to regulate our nervous systems. We're not going to be able to support anyone if we are reacting from a reactive place. And, I can speak, as a Jewish person, I can say that oftentimes what I see from other folks in the Jewish community is that oftentimes our collective trauma can get very activated. And then there is a way in which there is a real jump to what are we going to do? And what's going to happen? What's the response? And what's going to happen to this kid? And we need to slow things down, and again, look beneath the surface and take some care and look, how are we going to repair the relationship? And take some time there. And then also what can happen in a school system, again, and the need to slow things down and to look at the systems in place. And again, the need for adults and school systems and administrators to really hold the whole system, is that I've just seen how things can spin out of hand really fast. Once kids get a little bit older, and again, depending on what the policy is at the school with technology, if word gets out and then parents start notifying other parents, just the way like word spread, and then the community wants a really fast community response to an incident where they may not fully understand what the incident was, or what was the profile or the circumstance for the student who may have harmed another student. And again, that compassion and care and the restorative process for that student who may have not even understood what they have done. So just really slowing the whole thing down and giving the whole sort of collective nervous system of the school a moment, I think is a really important element, like from a sort of trauma transform perspective.
Thanks, Jamie.
May I add one thing, Laura?
And then Julia, yeah.
Sorry, just to connect what Jamie's saying around being adults. When I work with school leaders and district superintendents, particularly at this moment, part of the needing to be adults is also recognizing just the profound trauma and grief the leaders of the schools and the districts are holding and experiencing right now. Yes. The trauma and the grief tends to be, if I were mapping the data points around, for all of these years, and the reason I'm in this leadership role is because I am in service to these families, my Jewish families, my Muslim families, my queer families, whomever we are, and now they're coming at me so hard about their personal traumatic experience that I cannot fix in a school context. And that's going to be part of this leadership moment right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be part of leadership moment to be in conflict with your teachers. Because when I became a teacher, it was totally passion motivated, because my K-12 education sucked and I was there to fix it. And that's not why teachers don't become teachers, because they're dispassionate about their subject matter. And so you're going to disappoint your teachers right now. You may have to let some folks go. You may be in conflict with your board. And that's, to Jamie's point, that's also part of our adult work right now, is clearly understanding our charge and to whom we are in service, and holding that steady, and then getting that support we need or you need, so that we don't fall apart in being in service.
Thanks, Alana. I want to go to Jaleel, but I want to name explicitly for those of you who are in the audience and kind of like, well, this is feeling like very here. Like, how does it move into here? What Alana offered, that is actually a strategy. The strategy is, as a school leader, is holding ourselves accountable, or mental health provider, to creating space outside potentially of your role, or maybe even within your role, so that we can do the affinity-based group and then cross-difference work, so that we can then arrive to others with a little bit more clarity and a little bit more collectedness. That is the strategy, right? Julia, I want to move to you again. Counseling, resources, faith-based bullying, like, how does this look from a mental health perspective, violence prevention perspective?
Sure. Let me offer one example. As they used to say in this country, you know, talk the talk. How do you walk the walk? So what's the practical application of these nice, you know, altruistic goals we have? And I do think there are some best practices we can draw from. I'm going to share our best practices for trauma-informed violence prevention. I'm going to tweak them, which are intended to do to be fluid for context for today's faith-based work that I do. One is, out of these 5 best practices, one is you have to provide trauma-informed services in both prevention and intervention. As nice as we may be, as hard as we may work, some folks are going to be stressed out. Some may react with traumatic reactions. And sometimes there's these co-occurring conditions which may be going on. Substance abuse in the family, even though that's a big taboo, it can happen. The sudden grief and loss, the cumulative effects of being displaced. These are real issues, even if you're working hard as a school. So number one, we say there should be trauma-informed services at both prevention and intervention levels. So at whatever level of need on that continuum of needs, you have something in place. If you can't do it all yourself as a school, then make partnerships, the service system partnerships, both in-school services as well as community-based services that can supplement what you're doing. Second, we believe you have to connect to supportive, positive adults and peers. And for old folks like me, let me underscore, and peers. It's one thing if the kids are coming home and they're struggling and you say, oh, I just love you, baby. It's okay. You know, your dad loves you. Well, that fulfills one role, but not every role. They're around these peers all day long. And sometimes it's very helpful to have a positive peer you can connect to inside your school setting that then is complemented by the family supports when we see them after school and throughout the rest of the week. I will suggest one is not a substitute for another. If you're connected to positive peers, but you got conflicts at home, or you feel like your parents don't understand you and what you're going through, or they're just saying, just toughen up. And unfortunately, we do have some parents as a survival skill will say, just deal with it. Why do they say just deal with it? Because they may have overcome all types of immense obstacles just to get to this point, or they lived through similar types of bullying and they didn't get any support. So from their framework, they don't understand why you have to take all these extra steps now, right? Do I survive, you survive. And again, I'm trying to frame this. This is not because parents don't care. Parents are using what they got based on what they know, just like our teachers. So we can come and interject. No, that is a good thing to actually, you get support and to support your children. And sometimes by having positive peers who are from a similar cultural background or from a similar experience, or they may be getting bullied for very different reasons by the same group of kids over here, they can connect to each other. There's an affirmation of experiences just invaluable amongst your peer group. Third, we say you should strengthen the skills of the youth. Every kid has a gift. From our perspective, whether it's in art, whether it's academics, whether it's athletics, find something that the kid is very much interested in and inspired by, especially if it's a school supported. That does two things. One, you can gain credibility, sometimes even overcome some of that alienation at school because you're good at basketball, or you made the school look good because you won a debate championship, or you were in the marching band, or you were doing something within the school setting that gets recognized and affirmed. And it can get a lot of credibility amongst the peer group. They can kind of cut down some of that bullying if it's going on. Also, it opens other doors for additional connections beyond even that particular activity. Great thing. We also want to suggest that we want all the folks on board to support those skills. So we talk about teachers being great, cultivators of talent, great inspiration. We would also say, from a holistic school context, what can that security guard do? Because a lot of times the conflicts which happen having to do with bullying, having to do with violence, the security guards get involved, or the school-based resource officers or police officers get involved. We want to kind of break up that preschool to prison pipeline. And I said preschool to prison pipeline that is sometimes occurring among some of our marginalized communities. So having them on board as part of recognizing and strengthening the youth skills and being supportive is critical. Finishing up quickly with the last two. Number 4, establish a sense of safety. This includes societal awareness and situational awareness, talking very openly, as well as self-defense. Now, will there always be a possibility someone can bully you? Yes. But if there's a sense of safety, there's at least some safe places, some safe people I can talk to, some sense of people who like me within the school or within the community, that establishes a sense of safety. Doesn't have to be that you'll never get touched or you'll never get bothered, but there's enough of a sense of safety that I can look at that as like a one-off, not the whole school is against me. And last but not least, challenging community and cultural norms. What do I mean by that? I mean the culture of violence that we have in our American society. We don't always condemn violence. Sometimes we glorify violence. And it's in our video games, it's in our movies, it's in some of our language. And this is uncomfortable for some of us to talk about, but we have to address that. Kids are soaking up the norms that they see around us. And so if you use disrespectful words, if they see adults fighting on YouTube, they're going to fight. They're going to use those same terms. Those words were passed down from someone. Our kids didn't come up with this vocabulary by themselves. And so we want to say there's a whole societal, social, cultural norm that we need to address. This othering that I just mentioned, coming from a historical, intergenerational dynamic which has gone on, and also related to schools. This includes having to be fluid with new challenges, like we were talking in some of our planning meetings. We got kids who are from these different faith-based backgrounds who are targets of bullying. They're refugees, unaccompanied minors. They're being sent to hostile cities. They're being sent to encampments. They're coming from countries which are very much attacked in the news, like Afghanistan, Iraq. And so we have to acknowledge that is part of our planning to how to support those kids coming from that specific context. But we think if you do those 5 best practices, that will strengthen both the intervention and prevention services and environment around schools where it'll be much healthier and hopefully happier.
Jaleel, one of the things that you just named, Jamie and Alana, in this last question was the power of knowing one's place, and particularly in relationship to proximity to one's own experience of heightened harm and the community. And what I mean by that is, it's a school leader, school social worker, school fill in the blanks invitation for us to be discerned. Am I so close to the epicenter of harm and to the incident that I might lose perspective and I'm not the person to hold it? And who can I partner with or bring in who might have more space and oxygen and skill in order to also hold me in it as a school leader or school mental health provider? And I'm giving a nod to one of the questions right now in the Q&A of a social worker who's saying, yeah, school staff may not be trained to hold harm, but we are. Bring us in. And maybe I'm not even a school-based social worker. Maybe I work with a community-based organization. Work with me, use me, right? Tap into me. So I want to go to Reina first, because I'm going to move into a question on how do we partner with community organizations, whether they're traditional school mental health organizations, whether there's traditional anti-bullying or broad, to help hold us so that we can hold others. And I'm going to go to Reina, and then of course I want to hear Sarah and Shahar about examples from New Ground. Reina.
Yeah, thanks, Leora. I want to first rewind a little bit and offer, there's so many great ideas that are being shared in context, and I just want to offer a framework that might be helpful just in categorizing how we think about this oppression that's manifesting, right? We can think about oppression along multiple layers. There's kind of this individual layer where as we work one-on-one with students whose intersectional identities are impacted by faith-based bullying, it's so crucial for us to support them in developing a positive self-identity, one that rejects assimilation and instead honors their unique identities and supports their acculturation. And some of that partnership, not only comes from a school-based mental health team member, but also looking outside of school. What trusted adults exist not only in the school building, but in the community? What mental health resources can our students tap into that are accessible? And I want to highlight that because sometimes our students who are most impacted by many different layers of oppression are also the ones who are not as well resourced, right? So how do we, think about the delivery of mental health resources and supports to those who are less privileged? When we think about kind of the interpersonal layer, I think this got talked about a lot. We can't ignore bias-based behavior just because it's uncomfortable. And that happens a lot of maybe I heard something back there in the corner of my classroom, but I'm not sure. I don't want to call anybody out, so I'm going to just move on. Right. Or maybe, that student, they raised their hand in a weird way. It kind of reminded me of a Nazi salute, but I'm not sure. Do I address that? Silence is complicity. If we're not addressing these things swiftly and confidently, then what we are saying is that I am okay with this. And then that becomes this pattern of behavior, right? And then there's federal, state, district level non-discrimination policies that, we should be abiding by. There's also school-based strategies. And I'm not saying that, those responses have to be punitive. We talked a lot about, the panelists shared about having restorative consequences that are meaningful, that are rooted in learning and repair and building relationship. But also that's not always possible when there's power dynamics at play, right? If it truly is bullying, then we need to kind of step back and think about, is this something that a restorative intervention is going to support with, or might a restorative intervention further victimize a person who's already been victimized? So really kind of weighing all of these different things, right? Institutionally, we also need to take a look at the policies that I mentioned, but also day-to-day policies and practices. What gaps exist? Do Muslim and Jewish students have access to halal and kosher food at lunch? If not, can we partner with community resources and organizations to be able to offer more of that? Are students respected and attended to when they're fasting or when they're celebrating their high holidays that may not align with the Christian-based school calendar, right? Do students receive accommodations for prayer times? And does the curriculum present positive reflections of student identities? Or are Jewish identities only shown in conversations about the Holocaust? Are Black identities only discussed in context of slavery and Jim Crow? Are Muslim identities only talked about in the context of, 9/11 and Afghanistan and Iraq and oil, right? And so really thinking about all of these different ways that we can either perpetuate oppression and harm and discrimination through these policies that happen in schools, or ways that we can truly dismantle these systems of oppression that have really been at the root of our educational system for as long as that system has existed, right? And then also thinking about structurally, what is the interplay between different systems of oppression? So how does housing and economics, the socio-political climate impact the climate in a school? And how do we, as educators and mental health staff, we have very limited influence and certainly very limited control over those things, but those partnerships, that is what can get open the door to us evolving and creating a more holistic space of support. In a former role, we partnered extensively with our community library, and we had different things that we were kind of working through at our school libraries, as many districts are working through across the nation in terms of book bans and restrictions and things like that. But being able to work with our community library partners, we were able to directly host, book lists that helped to affirm LGBTQ identity and Muslim identity and identities of students who had family members who were incarcerated, or who were maybe experiencing homelessness, who were Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, right? Thinking really intersectionally about all of these different ways that all of our students need to be affirmed and supported. And what you said, Leora, those community partnerships can be huge, because educators and education systems don't exist in a silo, where there's this interplay back and forth across our entire community.
Thank you, Raina. There's so much power in each person's offering. And as I said at the very beginning, we have to expect and accept a lack of closure with our time held. So I'm feeling it personally right now. So just for everyone in the room to hear, we had questions around community partnerships, we had questions around allyship, we had questions around student leadership, which Jalil, you spoke to really beautifully. I want to maybe move us into a sense of closing by actually doing a full go around with which is risky as a moderator, so please keep, but a full go around with what is our call-in, either for our quote unquote own shared identity group or an allied identity group, right? Like what are we calling people into, either to learn or to unlearn after today? So I'm literally gonna go, and let's go Shachar, Sarah, Reina, Jamie, Jalil, Alana. We'll go opposite. So I'll say that question one more time. What are we inviting folks to learn or unlearn, either in our quote unquote own identity groups, plural, or across difference, or in our own professional space, in our own role? Shachar.
I'm going to take a breath before I think about what I want to say. Something I'm holding on to I'm going to speak to my own identity group right now. Hi, fellow Jews. One of the things I heard someone say on the last Zoom was like, when we're thinking about this, we need to think like, what is the point of education, right? Like we're talking about education. What is the point of it? And I'm thinking about the trauma, like so much trauma that we hold, and so much of that trauma also like feeds into this really hard narrative of like the inevitability of harm also. And I want us to see ourselves in community, to both feel a sense of belonging, find spaces to be in belonging, and also make sure we're creating spaces of belonging for others, because that feels like, and especially for our Muslim cousins, I think that feels like that is the overarching thing I'm taking away from today, is like, what does it really meaningfully look like to create senses and spaces of belonging for one another and for ourselves?
Thanks, Shachar. Sarah.
I'm going to name that school districts are under immense pressure right now to do something about, and I'm using the terms intentionally, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And it is often becoming about checking off a box. We did something about anti-Semitism. We did something about Islamophobia. Shachar said something a while back about how we have to remember, and I'm kind of rephrasing what the idea, the goal is not to mitigate anti-Semitism and Islamophobia for the sake of mitigating anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. The question is, are the measures you're taking bringing people back into relationship again? Are they providing connection? Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, connection and belonging is the opposite of bias and bullying. So it's something for schools and school leaders to think about as they're thinking about how to respond to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So I wanted to put that out there. Allyship. I think somebody else said this, remembering how we're showing up in conversations and our place in conversations. As a Muslim South Asian woman in the last year, and even before the last year, what allyship looks like for me, especially in the really difficult and painful moments, and there have been a lot of them since October, is taking a moment to turn to my Jewish neighbors, regardless of whether or not we share a political position, being unconditional about reaching out to my Jewish neighbors and asking them, how does this land on you? How did this make you feel? What could I have done differently? Help me see this the way you see and feel and understand it. Doing that doesn't require me to walk away from who I am. But remembering reaching out to my Jewish neighbors. And at the same time, I pointed, I'm a South Asian woman. I'm not Palestinian. I also worry about erasing the Palestinian narrative sometimes when you're being invited to speak as a Muslim speaker. So remembering to also take time to ask my Palestinian neighbors, how does this land on you? What are you thinking and feeling in this moment? What can I learn? How can I do better? So that's what I'm thinking about. And that's how I'm practicing allyship. It's a practice, right? I'm going to mess up too, and giving myself room to mess up and improve.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, Raina and Jamie, Jalil, and Alana, and I'm going to invite you short and sweet and powerful. Raina.
Yeah, I think I just have two tidbits to share. One, the hardest part about allyship is decentering yourself. Our brains it requires us literally rewiring how we function in order to decenter ourselves and center the person or the group that's most impacted. And that is also at the very core of authentic allyship. And the other thing that I want to share is it's actually a nugget of wisdom from Dr. Sean Ginwright, who wrote The Four Pivots. And one of those pivots is shifting from lens to mirror. And what he means by that is shifting from, not always only thinking about looking outward at what's happening. It's important to gain knowledge, but also holding a mirror to ourselves. And really thinking about, how am I showing up in this space? How can I have cultural humility in the way that I am interacting with others and myself? And, am I truly living the values that I'm espousing? Right. And really being able to reflect critically. It's going to bring up a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's hard, but if we truly want to heal for ourselves and for other people, healing isn't easy. Right. If it was, we'd all be a more perfect society.
Thanks, Raina. All right, Jamie, Jalil, Alana, round us out. 1 minute or less.
I think I just want to second everything that Sada said in the first part about just focusing on, relationship, that it's really about, I just want to invite, my school community to really keep focusing on, relationship. When we're in relationship with each other, when we harm each other, we'll come back to relationship. And that seems to me to be the fundamental core. And then seconding what Shahar said also about really working within my Jewish community to really work to heal from the collective intergenerational trauma, so that we can really move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Sorry, Jaleel was waiting for me to say thank you. Jaleel and then Alana, and then we'll close.
Yeah, short and sweet. I see there's a lot of crisis, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And I see the best of our youth the last few years from the Black Lives Matter movement forward. There's lots of good grassroots efforts and energies. They're pushing for positive change, sometimes even against some of us adults who are unable or unwilling to do that same hard, uncomfortable work to make those changes. So I'm challenging myself and all of the people here to be upstanders for social justice, not just bystanders to social processes.
All right, Alana, last words, and then
Okay, I'm going to try to be brief and have this make sense. This is for school leaders, for Jews, and I think Jewish leaders. We are all suffering under like a tyranny of policies or a tyranny of the context of the wave of like how we want to tell Jewish leaders to respond in public, and people are feeling silenced. School leaders are feeling silenced. We're all not sort of integrated into our most powerful and best selves. And so what can we do as Jews, as school leaders, maybe as Jewish school leaders, to silence the tyranny of what people are telling us to do, even though it's all right there, silence the tyranny of the policies and the practice and the context, just for a minute, even though we have to acknowledge it, to cut through it and find our recentering strategies to bring it all back so that we can move from disintegrated leaders to integrated leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoa. Okay. That was it. Speaking of disintegrated to integrate, I'm integrating myself right now as we move into close. And I want to I'm going to task myself with being a weaver and a thank youer, and also being mindful of time. So a couple things, right? I want to invite all of us listening, if our minds were going to, but what about the teachers? What about the evidence-based practices? I want to invite us that there were many different practices and anti-bullying programs and opportunities for us to translate the teachings of today onto other roles or populations, et cetera. So what would it look like for us in the mental health world to actually reframe anti-bullying practices that the New Ground program that Shahar and Sarah represent in bringing young people together to hold in discourse, that is actually an anti-bullying practice, right? Or that Jalil's commitment to violence prevention intervention is also connected to faith-based spaces, or that, right, Jamie's invitation for us to be in and Shahar's invitation for us to hold restorative practices, not just interpersonally but as a school community, right? All of those pieces particularly invite us to map on these teachings into other spaces. Alana's teaching that she just landed on, this integration, is a real call for us to be involved in our own self-inquiry and in collective inquiry. And I want to name that everyone today is part of organizations and teachings and practices that we can resource so that we can resource others, right? It is both a co-regulation, co-resourcing, self-regulation, self-resourcing practice. So all that to say, speaking of resources, I really welcome you to check out our collective CV that has all of the organizations and just like I mentioned, publications to extend your learning, as well as our priming resources document. You'll receive your certificate of attendance right after today. Please let us know how today landed. What did you walk away with that you want to learn more about, that you want to unlearn more about, knowing the confines of a 90-minute conversation. Invite you to stay in touch with us, but most importantly, I want to end with this invitation for all of us. Even if we may not hold traditional school leadership roles, we are, right? How might we model inclusive school leadership and be firm in protecting all students from hate and racist discourse while being generous in extending empathy to those experiencing fear and grief? That is the invitation for us to hold the both and, to hold the both and rigorously. We are firm and also generous. We are holding we are unpacking intent while also holding impact, in the words of our colleagues today. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A deep, deep, deep thank you. Please join me in thanking Alana and Jalil and Jamie and Reina and Shahar and Sarah. Thank you for on behalf of the whole Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network and our team. I'm going to invite you to say goodbye to us. And we hope to be in extended learning with you after today. Gratitude to all. Thank you so much.